Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 6 of the fantasy football season. We'll go through all 30 teams, 15 matchups in total, and you can pause your screen and go to any matchup that you want right here, or you can check out the time codes as well in the description. Now, got to know that the Texans and Vikings are on bye this week, so you will not have Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, some really big names that are typically in your lineup. But don't worry, I'm going to rank every receiver so you'll know exactly what I would do with your fantasy team. And by the way, I'm replying to the first 3 comments of every video this year. So make sure you're subscribed and you've turned your notifications on. Okay, let's start with Thursday Night Football. We've got the Eagles at the Giants. I know there's a lot of anger around the Eagles wide receiver room. We'll talk about this. The Eagles are heavy favorites, 7.5-point favorites. And I would argue that that is potentially a recipe for disaster for these wide receivers, right? What you don't want to see is the Eagles in a game where they're heavy favorites, because typically that means they run the ball out and they're not really looking to throw the ball much. Now, last week, a game where, we all felt like there was some frustration from the wide receivers and it felt very obvious that they wanted to target their guys. Well, that was the first game this year that they lost. It kind of feels like they're going to go more towards the run-heavy schemes that they've been running. But here's the deal. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, both spot starts for me. They are flexible names. Again, I've ranked every receiver so you'll know where I stand for your team. A.J. Brown, my wide receiver, 22. Devonta Smith, my wide receiver, 26. Now, here's the thing. A.J. Brown, what's weird is the targets have been there. If I told you from week 2 onwards, A.J. Brown is averaging over 8.5 targets per game, you'd probably be happy with that without knowing the fantasy points. But there's a really weird vibe right now with the Eagles and A.J. Brown. There's weird chemistry with him and Jalen Hurts. They're not on the same page. He's giving up on big plays. But I would still say he's a startable name. And at least for A.J. Brown, the Giants are the 3rd best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. So at least it's a good matchup if he can get it done in the first 3 quarters. Now, for Devonta Smith, coming off a pretty decent game, obviously, over 100 yards. He was great versus the Broncos, and he is also a flexible name. Now, you'll notice throughout this video, I don't have many must starts. There's a lot of spot starts because this year, more than any other year in recent memory, we really have to break down each of these matchups. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Wan'Dale Robinson, I have labeled a risky start, which means that 95% of you guys have a better option, but he's not a bad Hail Mary play, honestly. If you look last week, the first game without Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson by far led the team in snaps, routes run, targets, right? At least amongst wide receivers. He had 8 total opportunities. Now that didn't turn into anything. It just turned into 8.2 fantasy points, 5 catches and 30 yards. However, if you think purely from a game script perspective, if the Eagles are heavy favorites, surely that means there'll be some sweet garbage time for Wan'Dale Robinson. So he's not the worst, desperation flex if you don't have a better name out there. Now, there's not another receiver we're going to talk about. I think Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger could actually get some valuable targets in this game. Let's move on to the London game. Broncos at Jets, 43.5-point over-under. The Broncos are heavy favorites. Now, I know it's technically not a great matchup for Courtland Sutton. The Jets are middle of the pack against wide receivers, but obviously they have one of the better corners in the league in Sauce Gardner. But I was actually concerned about Courtland Sutton just last week, right? I mean, you think about last week, they faced the Philadelphia Eagles. That secondary is great. And yet still, Courtland Sutton had 10 targets, led the wide receiver room easily in every sort of usage stat. And you can see he ended up with almost 18 PPR points, caught 8 of 10 targets for 99 receiving yards. 18 points without getting into the end zone. We dream of that for our wide receiver too. So I am going to label him a must start, even though it's not technically a great game. Now, Troy Franklin keeps having, decent opportunities and not converting on them. He's a risky start for me. If Sutton is locked down, I think Franklin and Mims, one of them could score a touchdown. On the opposite side of the ball, it is not a good matchup, right? Patrick Surtain is no joke. However, with Garrett Wilson, there's just nobody else in this offense that they target, right? And it even comes down to garbage time sometimes. Like last week, Garrett Wilson was a terrible play for 3.5 quarters. And then one of the last couple drives, Garrett Wilson scores a touchdown. We've seen that multiple weeks now. And that's just the reality with Garrett Wilson. He is by far the heavy number 1 wide receiver in this offense, so you can play him. Okay, let's go to the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games on Sunday. We've got the Rams at the Ravens. Rams are heavy favorites. Let's not make this too difficult. Of course, you're going to start Puka Nacua. I love playing him in the flock league. He's the only reason each and every week I feel like I'm not out of my matchup because Puka Nacua can do anything. Oh my gosh, it's so fun to watch. Now, Devontae Adams also getting heavily targeted, utilized in the red zone, in the end zone. So both of these guys are must starts in a great matchup against the Ravens, who are the second best matchup for your wide receiver. Just last week, CJ Stroud, for the first time in ages, had his best game, 4 passing touchdowns, right? Everybody had a little bit of share of the pie, except for Woody Marks. Don't talk to me about it. I'm still upset at the coaching staff. But the point is, Rams should dominate. Matthew Stafford's even a great streamer, right? Now, on the opposite side of the ball, we don't exactly know who's starting at quarterback yet at the time of recording this. I imagine Lamar Jackson won't be available, and they'll probably go to Snoop Huntley. That's my expectation. It's probably Huntley over Cooper Rush. I don't think it really matters who the quarterback is. Regardless, Zay Flowers is a spot start. My wide receiver 21. This team's going to be down. They're going to need to throw to someone, and it's probably going to be Zay Flowers. That's as simple as it is. Okay, let's go to Cowboys at Panthers. So the Cowboys, 48.5 point over-under. They're always in these high over-unders, and there's always a lot of points involved in their matchups. That's why I'm super excited for both sides of the ball here. Yes, technically, it's the second worst matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. I don't care. I'm putting George Pickens into my lineup, okay? If they're going to score a touchdown through the air, George Pickens is going to have a great chance to be the reason why. Even last week, on only 4 targets, they still found him in the end zone. He's on an absolute heater, and you don't walk away from a heater. So we can put George Pickens into our lineup. Ryan Flournoy is more of a stash at this point than a serious name to suggest starting. And then on the opposite side of the ball, Tetairoa McMillan keeps having games where he looks incredible and just making awesome plays, beating his man, both separation after the catch and also winning one-on-one balls. I think this could finally be the game where T-Mac goes over 100 yards and gets a touchdown. I really do. Because the Cowboys are the best matchup for your wide receiver. It's a high over-under. The Cowboys are favored. Every sign points toward T-Mac having his best ever day as a pro. I'm banking on that happening in my own leagues. Now, look, technically Leggett is not the worst start. Jalen Coker is, practicing, so maybe he gets involved in this game. There's probably another receiver that gets some fantasy points. I just don't know who that's going to be. But if you're in a DFS lineup or, a really, really deep league, like a 32-team league, there are worse plays than Leggett and Coker in that scenario. Okay, let's go to the Cardinals at the Colts. Marvin Harrison is a must start for me, and that's because, number one, I don't believe the Cardinals are going to be up in this game. I think they're going to be down to the Colts. The Colts look great. And number two, it's a great matchup for Marvin Harrison. The Colts are the 5th best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. So what happened last week is the Cardinals were up for the majority of the game and then lost it at the last second. I think we'll see the opposite this week. Not to say that the Cardinals will win, but they'll be down for the majority of this game, needing to throw. That should be good for Marvin Harrison. I'm saying should, because anything can happen in fantasy football. The game of football is not played on paper, but on paper, this is a great matchup, okay? Now, on the opposite side of the ball, you can keep playing Michael Pittman. He's been the most reliable receiver in this offense. It was awesome to see Josh Downs get some more work last week, but I still trust Pittman over Downs if you have to choose one of those names. And Pittman's been building a lot of chemistry with Daniel Jones. Yeah. Okay, Seahawks at the Jags, 44.5 point over under. Of course, you're going to start JSN. We all know that. One of the best players in fantasy football right now. And it's been awesome to see how good Sam Darnold has been for JSN, right? A lot of people were worried about Darnold, but he's been the best quarterback that Jason has played with in his career so far. I think that's really fair to say. Now, if you want to play Cooper Kupp, there are worse desperation flexes out there. That's what he is. He's a desperation flex, but there are worse desperation plays out there. He had 8 targets last week, had the same amount of snaps as Jason, and actually ran more routes. So there are plenty of signs to say Cooper Kupp is a fine floor play. But unfortunately, because of Torrey Horton's involvement in the red zone, he keeps scoring touchdowns. That really hurts the upside of a Cooper Kupp. Now, I'd be hesitant to play Torrey Horton. He's still not seeing a high percentage of the snaps. Every week, he's the 3rd wide receiver in this offense. And unless he scores a touchdown, you're going to be disappointed. Touchdowns are the least sticky stat in fantasy football. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Brian Thomas finally had a game that is worth talking about. He didn't make any silly mistakes. On the opportunities that he got, he only had 6 targets, but on those opportunities, he looked pretty good. He caught 4 of them for 80 yards, had a big play towards the end of the game where he came down with the ball. It was a perfect ball from Trevor Lawrence. I wish we saw that more often, but perfect ball. He came down with it through contact with confidence. Now, he had 6 targets. You want to see that number be higher, but you can see them getting more and more involved and more confidence with Brian Thomas. So my wide receiver 25 this week. I do think the Seahawks will be up in this game, which means Brian Thomas, or at minimum, it'll be a competitive game, which means Brian Thomas should be a decent flex. Okay, let's go to the Chargers at the Dolphins. So last week, it's so funny, man. Like this is fantasy football to a T. To a T. The first 4 weeks of the year, I kept saying on this video, I'm telling y'all, at some point, it's going to come back to Ladd McConkey, and there's just going to be certain times where one of these 3 receivers is going to bust. And at some point, that might be Quentin Johnston, right? I said that the first 4 weeks of the season. Then last week in week 5, I finally said, okay, I was wrong. Okay, Quentin Johnston's the alpha on this team. And then as soon as I admit that I'm wrong, I'm like, you know what? Quentin Johnston is the alpha. He's that dude. Then he comes out and has 4 targets. Fumbles the ball, has 40 yards. I mean, so I'm right back to what I thought in weeks 1 to 5, which is this is a great offense to be a part of, especially now without Hampton. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton, but it will be a little bit of a his turn, my turn, their turn, his turn, my turn, their turn, each and every week. Now, Keenan Allen led the way with 9 targets. Quentin had 4, right? Ladd had 6. Ladd ended up getting into the end zone, which was great. He scored 14.9 points. This is what I would more anticipate every week from this wide receiver room, is a little bit of a merry-go-round. Now, I'm still going to label Johnston and Keenan Allen must-starts because I like the matchup against the Dolphins, even though technically on paper it's not a good matchup. I like this matchup, and I also like the identity of what I anticipate the Chargers being this week, which is very pass-heavy. I anticipate them throwing the ball a ton with no Najee Harris, no Amarion Hampton, bad offensive line. I see them throwing the ball a lot. Now, I still prefer Johnston because of the big playability. Keenan is still the safest play, and Ladd McConkey is still a decent flex. That's how I'm breaking it down. But let's be real, fantasy football is unpredictable. We know this. On the opposite side of the ball, it was great to see post Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle finally get kind of really featured, really peppered in this offense, right? Finally, a game over 8 targets. He had 9 targets in this game, ended up getting into the end zone, 23 fantasy points, 110 receiving yards. That's what you want to see. So right now, I'm with confidence starting Jalen Waddle each and every week until they show us that they're not going to feature him. And if you remember in his rookie season, he was featured. I think they'll continue to feature him. Let's go to the Browns at the Steelers. I have no confidence in starting any Browns receivers. I have no confidence, okay? I don't care that the Steelers are the 6th best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. I don't care. I'm not sure it really should matter because of how bad this passing attack is in Cleveland. It's bad, guys. It's really bad. And we are seeing Dylan Gabriel, who looked fine in London. We're seeing him heavily target his tight ends. 9 targets to David Njoku, 4 targets to Harold Fannin. That is a Mickey Mouse offense, but it makes sense why they have to do that with a young rookie in Dylan Gabriel. Jerry Jeudy had 3 targets, 3.5 points. Isaiah Bond had a good amount of opportunities, but still didn't score over 5 fantasy points. So I just don't know how I can tell you to start any of these guys with confidence. I'm benching them. And on top of that, it's the lowest over-under of the week at 38.5 points. The Steelers are heavy favorites. The only name you can mess around with here is DK Metcalf. And I would be concerned about DK Metcalf if I owned him this week as well, because the Browns are a pretty good defense. All right. Difficult to move the ball against them. And DK Metcalf has not been thriving off of targets. He's been thriving off of efficiency and touchdowns. So that's difficult to predict each and every week. But of course you can play him. He's my wide receiver 27. So I'm not saying I don't like DK. Don't hear where I'm coming from, right? Where I'm not coming from, right? I like DK. He's a fine play this week. But I do think there are some bust games on the horizon for him because of the way this offense is currently being deployed under Arthur Smith. News is constantly changing in the NFL. I mean, for example, last week around midweek, Michael Carter came out and told everyone he was a starter for the Cardinals. If you want my latest up-to-date rankings, as soon as I hit submit for weekly and rest of season, then become a season pass member with the promo code LAND. If you use my code, it'll be a $34 one-time purchase for the entire season. You get access to some vouchers to come on our live stream and ask us questions, all the premium tools on the Flock site like the trade calculator, and of course, my latest up-to-date rankings. If you want to support the show, keep the lights on, and get a great value, check that out in the description. All right, let's jump to the Patriots at the Saints. Man, I am very excited about Stephon Diggs. I am super excited to see his role grow over the course of the year. We were very high on Diggs on this channel in the offseason, and we've been very quiet about it because it didn't really look good to start the year. But finally, Diggs coming off that injury is starting to really dominate this receiver room, man. 12 targets. Now, it was a get-right game against Buffalo, right? The revenge game, if you will. But finally, he's playing a vast majority of the snaps. He's getting heavily targeted. We're seeing back-to-back weeks over 100 receiving yards. In this game, 146 receiving yards. Inbuilt chemistry with Drake May now, which is great to see. I think he should be starting in the vast majority of your fantasy teams this week. My wide receiver 20. It says spot start, but that's because I only have like 18 must starts this week anyway. But I do like him this week against the Saints. The only concern for me really is if the Saints just can't be competitive at all and they just run the ball a bunch for the New England Patriots. But it's in New Orleans. That's a great sign that it should be more a competitive game. So I think Diggs should be in the vast majority of your lineups. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, I do think Chris Olave continues to be the only name that you can start with confidence. Yeah, it was fun to see Rashid Shaheed get that long touchdown on Sunday. We all know that he's capable of that. He's doing a better job of being Jameson Williams than Jameson Williams is this season. We saw Shaheed with 5 targets last week, but banking on a long touchdown every week is difficult to do. So again, Olave is the only one I really trust, but it is a pretty decent matchup against the Pats, whose secondary is getting healthier, we have to admit. Okay, start of the afternoon slate of games. We've got the Titans at the Raiders. It's a 41.5 point over-under. The Raiders are favored by about a touchdown, 6.5 points. That spread could move this week. Now, let's start with the Titans side of the ball, because finally, for the first time this year, we saw signs of life for Calvin Ridley. Now, he had 10 targets. It took 10 targets for him to have a fantasy relevant day. Okay. So obviously that's concerning. You want to see him more efficient with his opportunities. Out of his 10 targets, did he catch 7? 6? No, he caught 5. He caught 5 of those targets. So about a 50% catch rate, which is what you should anticipate with Cam Ward right now on a week-to-week basis. But he made some great plays, 131 receiving yards. I believe that what happened last week is going to be difficult to replicate from one week to the next. I have labeled him a risky start. What I will say is there are far worse plays this week. By wide receiver 39, the Raiders, the 4th best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. It's tough to run against the Raiders. Much easier to throw. So if there's any game this year where Calvin Ridley's going to have a good game and we can say, hey, you can almost see that maybe being a potential, it would be this game versus the Raiders. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Jacoby Myers, Geno Smith is just not playing well, right? Trey Tucker's been the better fantasy receiver so far because he has more of the big play potential. They're not doing as much of the intermediate passing game right now with Jacoby Myers, but he's still getting enough targets to be considered, a floor flex, right? That's really what Jacoby Myers is right now, a floor flex. But this game is 2 bad teams, so it should be competitive, which is a great sign. And, both teams should need to throw the ball, so there are worse plays than Jacoby Myers. Okay, let's go to the 49ers at the Bucs. 47.5 point over under. The Bucs are favored right now. The Niners are dealing with a lot of injuries all over their offense and their defense. Now, let's talk Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings to start. Okay, firstly, Bucs are a middle-of-the-pack matchup for wide receivers, so that's not something we'll really focus on too much. Now, number one, Ricky Pearsall was not seen practicing on Monday for the 49ers. You have to monitor that throughout this entire week. I don't know if he's going to play yet. We don't know right now at the time of recording. However, Juwan Jennings was practicing on Monday, so that is a very good sign for his availability this week. What you're seeing on your screen with the graphic is my rankings if Pearsall and Jennings play. I think if both Pearsall and Jennings play, they're both flexible names. I like them as options this week, specifically against the Bucs, because I believe the Bucs offense is so good that you're going to need to throw the ball San Francisco is going to need to throw, right? They're going to have to throw. And obviously, Pearsall and Juwan Jennings are their preferred weapons when healthy. Now, let's play a scenario where if Pearsall and Jennings are out, then I do think Kendrick Bourne is in play, right? He'd be my wide receiver 30 in that scenario. And even Demarcus Robinson. There are worse plays than Demarcus Robinson. All the work this week went to Kendrick Bourne, but I wouldn't be surprised if that went to Demarcus Robinson this week, should both of those names be out in Pearsall and Jennings. I would have very low expectations for Kendrick Bourne and Demarcus Robinson if even one of these names, Pearsall or Jennings, are playing this week. I would really lower your expectations. Do not anticipate 10 targets again this week. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, of course, you're going to start Emeka Egbuka. He's had one of the best starts for fantasy football as a rookie of any rookie all time, really. I mean, it's like him and Puka Nacua up there in the top 5 to start their career in fantasy football. You got to start him by wide receiver 6. And then Chris Godwin is a flexible name. He's getting a lot of targets, decent amount of targets, right? It kind of went down from his first game to his second game, but there are worse plays. He's in a good offense. He's going to be used in the red zone. He's a decent option. What should be a competitive game. Okay, let's go to the Bengals at the Packers. 43.5 point over under. The Packers are heavy favorites. Now, I am actually much more confident. This is going to sound really weird, but let me explain. I'm more confident in the Bengal receivers this week than I am in the Packer receivers. And I say that because I just don't see how the Packers aren't heavily up in this game. Like, I don't see how by halftime the Packers aren't up by 2 touchdowns. Well, the spread is 14.5 points in favor of the Packers. They're the biggest favorites this year, so Vegas agrees. So if the Packers are heavy favorites and I anticipate them being up in this game, does that mean they're primarily running the ball out in the second half? I think that's a possibility. We've seen plenty of times where Romeo Doubs comes out and has big games and then disappears, right? We all want to see Matthew Golden break out. He's a great player. It could be Golden any given week. So I would say Romeo Doubs is the one name I would start of any of these guys, but it could be Golden as well. We could see Wicks get involved, right? We are already seeing, Christian Watson practicing, right? His 21-day pup practice window began this week. So even he could get involved if he's ready to go. I don't think he'll play this week, but there's a possibility. So weirdly enough, I think the Packers are almost in too good of a situation where it really concerns me that they might not need their wide receivers. So you can see my rankings here. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, I don't see a scenario where the Bengals don't need to throw the ball the entire game. And that's great news for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Jamar Chase, we've talked about this many times, a name that you can start each and every week, but obviously you need to lower your expectations without Joe Burrow. T. Higgins, we've been a little bit more worried about because he really is dependent on the big play, and those big plays are harder to rely on when it's not Joe Burrow throwing you the ball. So a spot start for T. Higgins, a must start for Jamar Chase. Let's move on to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Lions at the Chiefs. This should be a very exciting game for fantasy purposes. A very high over under, a lot of points expected in this one. Now, the Chiefs are technically not a good matchup for your wide receiver, but when you have an elite offense like the Lions, you don't really look at the matchup so much. Like, they're a plus, but they're not a reason to sit or lower a player in your rankings, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, must start. Let's talk about Jameson Williams. I feel sick to my stomach every time I have to talk about this. Last week, 8 targets. There was every reason to believe there was positive regression to the mean on the way. And then he comes out in a game versus the Bengals that they dominate and has one single target. One single target. A low on the year. A low in like his last 2 years playing for the Lions. But don't worry, guys. He led the way in snaps. He was right there with Amon-Ra and routes run. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm convinced at this point that Jameson Williams is invisible to Jared Goff. I can't tell you how many replays I'm watching where Jameson Williams is butt-ass naked open. The left side of the field, the right side of the field, down the field. And Jared Goff decides, that's fine. Who else is open? I'll throw their way instead. Jameson could have had like 3 or 4 touchdowns this year. He's open. He's just not getting any work. And they don't trust him enough to target him enough, right? I mean, he's far more valuable to their real NFL offense than he is to fantasy football right now. The threat of him down the field is so valuable to the dump offs to Jahmyr Gibbs, to the Laporta usage over the middle of the field, to Amon-Ra St. Brown over the middle of the field. But again, there will be a game this year. It will happen. I can't tell you what week, but it will happen where Jameson Williams has 2 touchdowns. It just will happen. So if you want that kind of upside in your lineup, you can do it, but clearly the floor is like one of the worst plays every single week. That is the floor with Jameson Williams this year, which is not what we saw last year. I know people were calling him boom bust last year. He had plenty of much safer games last year than he's had this year. It's just so frustrating, honestly, to own him. So lower your expectations drastically. On the opposite side, we are going to start Xavier Worthy, assuming he's healthy. He's been dealing with some injuries. Obviously, if he doesn't play, Hollywood and Tyquan Thornton become, actually really, really good plays. The Lions are a great matchup for your fantasy wide receiver, but Worthy is expected to be the number 1 guy for this team. He would be my most excited play of these names. Okay, let's go to Monday Night Football. We've got some double headers here. Starting off with the Bills at the Falcons, 49.5 point over under, one of the highest of the weeks. The Bills are favorites, but it's a very close spread. Shakir is a reliable floor play. You can count on anywhere from 7 to 12 fantasy points. He's going to get you that. So if that's what you want in your lineup this week, go for it. Now, Keon Coleman carries a lot more risk because his season so far has been a lot more up and down. We actually just learned recently that the Bills actually disciplined him early in the Week 5 game because of an incident in practice last week. Now, it didn't really seem to impact his playing time beyond the first drive. And obviously he got into the end zone, but he fumbled. So Keon, he really needs a big play. He really needs a touchdown to pay off. And I'm not sure you can bank on that this week versus the Falcons. On the opposite side of the ball, you start Drake London. Of course, you get him into your lineup. He is the vast majority of the targets are funneling through Drake London. Darnell Mooney is more of a desperation play. All right, before we get into our last matchup of the week, I want to tell y'all about 6 players I think are really great plays this week. All right, so in the FastDraft Quick 6 Super Slam Contest DFS lineup, we've got CMC with the 2 times points. It's a little chalky, but give me a second. Josh Jacobs versus the Bengals. We talked about how much we loved him this week. Best matchup you can have. JSN versus the Jaguars. But here's where things get interesting for us, all right? We're going Diggs at the Saints. Back-to-back games over 100 yards. I'm rocking with him. Rico Dowdle, revenge game versus the Cowboys, and Rachaad White back in that feature role. Those are the names I'm rocking with. You can create your own lineup. All you got to do is download the FastDraft app, use my promo code LAND at signup. I'll match your deposit up to $50, and then you're going to get my week rankings for this week completely free. You can check that out in the pinned comments down below. Last Monday Night Football, it's a doubleheader. Like we said, last game is Bears at Commanders, 50.5 point over under. I'm really excited about this one, honestly. Highest over under of the week. Commanders are favorites. Rome Odunze, my wide receiver 4, totally reached alpha status in the first 4 weeks of the season, right? Completely reached alpha status. Commanders are a top 10 matchup for your wide receiver. If the Commanders are up in this game, they're going to need to throw. Rome Odunze should be important. Now, DJ Moore is not as integral to the game plan so far, but I do think it's a pretty good matchup, so he's definitely worth playing. My wide receiver 29. And then on the opposite side of the ball, if Terry McLaurin, I'm not anticipating he's playing. There's some optimism that he could, but I'm ranking this right now as if he's not. And Deebo Samuel, one of my favorite players to draft this year. A lot of y'all didn't draft him because you said he was fat, but how awesome has it been to see Deebo, man? He's so perfect for this offense. I love him in this offense. It's been so fun to watch. You got to play him. Now, if Terry plays, both these guys are in play. I think you can play both Terry and Deebo. It's a pretty good matchup against the Bears, who are banged up with their entire secondary. But guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And just so you know, my running back start sit video is already out. You can check that out on the channel. It was posted earlier today. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you in the next one. Nothing but love. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.